Hello out there. I thought I'd make a little video here today to kind of discuss our first couple discussions we had last week. Under normal circumstances in class, we'd be able to kind of take a deeper look at this, but this will suffice here for kind of our first lesson here. So we had two questions. The first one was what is art? The second one is how we interact with art kind of on a daily basis, a more practical question. The first question is kind of a highly philosophical question, really, and that is, what is art? This is something tough to define. You could probably spend a whole semester really delving deep into it, and that's what hopefully you'll discover with almost any type of educational inquiry, is that the deeper you go into something, a lot of times the more questions you have rather than answers. That's kind of the fun thing about education, is you can always learn more and you always realize how much you have to learn. So with your definitions, I was really kind of being difficult, not to try to be mean or anything like that, but I really want you to think and consider your thought. A lot of times we'll say things, but not really think about the things we say. If we really take a deep look at things, sometimes things can be a little bit more complex than we think. So some of the things we mention, that we almost always mention when we think about art, is expression. That's one of the first things we mention, or creativity, imagination, intention, inspiration. These are usually things we associate with art. But what I tried to do is I tried to give kind of counterexamples of how those things don't necessarily make art art. For instance, if I think I used this example a couple times, like if I stub my toe and I yell "ouch," or something like that, I'm being expressive, certainly, and in that case I would be kind of yelling the word "ouch." But even though that happens in kind of an auditory means, it's not exactly the same thing as music, which would be kind of what we would consider art, even though they kind of take place in the same sphere. Maybe more of an example, like with visual art, would be like if I see, like I'm in a crowd and I see a plane going by and there's a banner behind the plane that says, Janet, marry me. Then I see these two couple over there, and one of them gives the other one a ring. That would be an expressive thing to do. That would be kind of imaginative, creative, but I don't think any of us would really describe that necessarily in terms of well, that's an art per se. Even we look at something like birth, that's something, one of the most creative things you can do is like actually creating another human being. And a human being is amazingly more imaginative, inspiring than just like a sculpture, and they both exist kind of in three-dimensional form as objects per se. But we don't, say that the mother in that case is the artist, and it's not a value judgment. It's just how we assign certain things to mean certain things. That's how words have meaning, is that they refer to something as opposed to something else. Another example of kind of creativity, imagination, how that is something we like to see in art, but sometimes the artist isn't exactly maybe doing that in the same way that we would kind of assume. A good example of what I'm talking about here, when I was in graduate school, the photography teacher was a big music fan, and so he knew an awful lot about music and photography. And he had mentioned in one of his lectures that the Beatles' Rubber Soul album, a lot of us, for instance, mentioned in ways that we interact with art. A lot of us mentioned music, and visually the albums that go along with the music is one way you could have an interaction with visual art there. And so when the Beatles were all taking kind of photographs for this album, the photographer, he was really just taking like a lens or a filter or something like that on the photograph, and he was just basically taking some trial photographs. He wasn't really trying to be creative or imaginative or expressive in any way. But when it came time to develop the film and the Beatles saw all of the different photographs he took, they liked the one that ended up being the album cover. It was kind of a little distorted and things like that. And so that's an example of how something is kind of creative and imaginative, but like the artist wasn't like intentionally thinking about it, you know. And so that's like something else we mentioned, is that maybe it's the intention of art that actually makes it art. And so we have to kind of be able to parse these different things. There's a difference between your subjective experience of art and kind of what it is in kind of the objective sense. That's not to say like one is more important than the other or anything like that, but if, for instance, we are inspired by an image, that is my reaction to it. That isn't necessarily what the artist meant. For instance, there's a very good drawing teacher I know of that is one of the best drawing teachers I've ever met. And with his art, he really just thinks about things in terms of design. You know, he's not thinking of like major meaning behind things in a lot of cases. It's really just, you know, the reason he decides to do this and the reason he decides to do that is just strictly on visual balance and those different aspects of art that we'll kind of go into starting this week. So that is an important kind of dance to make here with art, because art, on one hand, it is quite subjective. You know, for instance, what your favorite color is, I can't tell you what your favorite color is. Maybe it's green. Maybe you like purple more than yellow, okay? You know, that's anybody's personal preference. That's somebody's personal aesthetic is kind of what we would call that. But regardless of what color you like, they're both colors, okay? And so that's how we kind of can separate what is subjective versus what is objective. And so here we get into the separation between like the viewer versus the created object. That's kind of the difference. And when we look at that and we look at the definition of art, we come to see that a lot of times when we say the word art, we kind of mean it in two different ways. Okay. In one way, we would say something is an art almost kind of as an adjective, like something that's not even really even artistic. If someone's doing it really well, you'd say, well, that guy's got that thing down to an art. You know, that would be kind of the more descriptive adjective type of way to use it, which is okay. You can describe almost anything using an artistic language by saying artistic. On the other hand, we have the art kind of as a noun, as the thing, the object, so to speak. Okay, and so that is something that would be more objective because it does exist in the physical world, and then our subjective interpretations of that physical object are built basically upon that. Okay, and so it does kind of get into a general area here, because not everybody's perceptions are going to be 100% accurate, but they're not completely different either. For instance, if I said the color blue, you would know what I'm talking about. You know, on the margins there, blue and green, there's not one particular part, if we look at the color spectrum, where blue becomes green. But if we look at a blue color and we look at a green color, we can definitely tell that they're different. There's definitely differences there. That's where the distinctions of things can really help us when we are trying to describe things. Okay? So maybe to kind of come about this definition from a different angle here, we have this little story, and I'll be brief here. There's a story from a drawing teacher named Howard Ikemoto. He taught at a university, and one day his daughter, she was young, and she was asking him a bunch of questions, as children often do. And so she asked him what his job was, because she didn't know what her dad did. And so he said, well, he worked downtown, that he worked at the university, and he taught people how to draw. And rather than being satisfied with that answer, she looked back really confused, and she said, You mean people forget how to draw? And so that's kind of the standpoint I want to take this from. And that is, if you've ever had children, you might have had this experience where you didn't really like teach them how to draw, but you might find them with markers, or you might find them with pens or different things, and they're making marks in places they probably shouldn't be making marks. And so you have to tell little Johnny, hey, we don't use a Sharpie on a door in our bathroom. There's a place that we are going to use those things, and we'll, that'll be a piece of paper or something like that. Okay, so like even down to the really base level, these children, they'll do children drawings or children scribbles. And there's been a lot of child psychologist studies on these occurrences because it happens all across cultures. And they found out that at first children will just kind of scribble. But as soon as they have enough dexterity to create circles and triangles and things like that, then those things actually mean things. Usually the circle is the first shape that emerges. It's something they call the primordial circle. But it usually represents mommy or daddy, and then a triangle can represent house or car or something like that. And so we see from the very beginning that art, it is a couple of things. Okay, so the definition, I'm a fan of short, concise definitions. That's certainly true here. So the definition we're going to use here for what art is a very base fundamental definition. And we're going to define it as a primal or a natural communicative human activity. Okay, and because this is visual art, that takes place through the visual means. Okay, so it really has to have kind of those two things in it, that it's natural, it's primal, and then the second thing is that it is communicative. It's a language of sorts. So the definition, again, we would use is a primal or a natural communicative human activity taking place through visual means. Okay, so on top of that, we can put all of those different things that we really kind of respond to about art on top of that. We can use creativity, imagination, inspiration, expression. Those are really some of the great things about art. Okay, and those are kind of, as much as they're a part of art, they're also kind of functions or purposes of art. And with that, we can kind of pay attention to our second question that we had, which is, how is it that we interact with art? And I thought we did a good job with that. The way we interact with art on a daily basis can vary, but from fashion, for instance, this morning I went to church, so I dressed nicely. So that's one way we could interact with art. There's more subtle ways, like through advertisements. We see advertisements all the time. Chances are, if you buy a pair of shoes or a t-shirt, you'll have a logo of some sort. We see logos really almost all the time through advertisement. And we see that through TV, radio, a lot of different areas in life, computer. That's definitely one way. Photography is one way we interact with art quite a lot, especially like on social media and things of that nature. So I thought we did a good job here with that second question. Okay, so on our test, those are going to be the first two questions. I'm going to ask you, what is art? And with that question, it'll be worth 2 points. Again, the first thing I want is that it's this natural or primal human activity, and the second part is communicative type of thing. The second question you'll have on the test is the second question that we had as our discussion question, and that is how do we interact with art, and then kind of give me an example of that. So for instance, one way I could say is that one way I interact with art is through getting dressed in the morning and, for instance, putting a pair of shoes on that match with my shirt. That would be like a fashion or style, or even something simple, just the t-shirt you decide to wear. Maybe you like a particular color more than another particular color. And that is what I kind of mentioned it earlier, but what we would call aesthetic preference. That's kind of an important word with art. Aesthetic would be A-E-S-T-E-T-I-C-S, aesthetics. A lot of people use that in conjunction with the word beauty. It technically means different things. Aesthetics is a tough word to define, but the best way I can describe it would be the study of or the concerns of beauty or personal preference. That would really be what aesthetics is. And people's aesthetics, they will definitely differ a little bit, but at the same time there is some, fundamental principles of why we prefer things to other things. And we could get into that more once we have kind of a face-to-face class interaction if you want. But for now here, I'll just kind of leave this video at this, and with this week we'll start getting into kind of the elements of art, which is how it's kind of like the vocabulary of art. It's how, in the same way that you would have words to build up a sentence, This is what you have with visual art. You have certain principles, certain very fundamental things that you have to use to create your expression, so to speak. Okay, so let's start with that line video. Let's move on to all of those different elements of art this week. And again, if you have any questions, just send me a message on Canvas and I'll hopefully get back with you. All right.